Bagyashe. Well, let's continue here now. The final push by parties is in full swing today, with President Cyril Ramaphosa taking his campaign to Ivory Park, north of Johannesburg, and DA leader John Steenhuisen ramping up his campaign in Cape Town. This comes after Ramaphosa's Siyanqoba rally was held in Soweto last night, and EFF leader Julius Malema had his final rally in Katlehong. But have they done enough to attract voters? Let's discuss this further now. We're joined by an independent political analyst, Dale McKinley, and he joins me right here at The Rock. Welcome to The Rock, Dale.
Thank you, Nancy. Good to be here.
Fantastic. Now, Dale, obviously these elections have been earmarked as one of the most highly contested elections that we have seen. We've obviously seen a lot of wooing by political parties. Talk to me about how different this election is.
Well, I think it's different in a couple of ways. One, obviously, is because it's taking place within a pandemic. This is the first time we've ever had an election under these kinds of conditions, and I think that makes it a bit more challenging. Obviously, we even went to court, and we're having these elections. Many of the political parties wanted them next year. So I think there are some logistical challenges, and that also I think there's quite a number of people that might otherwise have voted that might say, look, I'm not really comfortable in going out to voting stations. We don't have a necessarily indication of the numbers, but I think it's certainly an impact, the COVID. So I think that's a different thing. I think secondly, one of the other differences is that we're in a situation from the last 5 years where the key issues are even more coming to the surface, which of course is service delivery issues. These have always been with us in local government elections, but I think over the last 5 years in particular, they've become even worse. Should we say service issues have become more in the minds of many, many voters, particularly in the municipalities and particularly the large metros, not just in the small towns and in the rural areas. And thirdly, I think also the larger political scene is quite different. We've had U.S. elections which have been, we had Donald Trump, we had a whole range of other kinds of populist parties winning power in many other parts of the world. So I think a lot of South Africans are looking and thinking political change is happening. Things are unpredictable. And also the ANC itself, the ruling party, has been in a bit of a pickle, should we say, in the last few years, and have had some very internal factional battles, and I think that's impacted.
I'd actually like to talk about that, and perhaps probably just, at the back of what you've said about service delivery. I mean, I think to the run-up of these elections, of course, just during the campaigning, we've seen how, South Africans are living in some of the most appalling conditions in the various municipalities that they are living in. I mean, we've seen water issues, electricity issues. Some people actually cannot drink or consume some of their water, and obviously coming out very hard, just against some of those political parties that are mandated to care for them in those municipalities. Now let's look at the top 3 political parties in the country and how they are doing in terms of wooing the voters. I mean, the ANC says, vote for us, we can do better. The EFF says we are not an alternative, we are the only answer for you. Of course, the DA is saying we get things done, etc. Have they done enough in the run-up to these elections to woo voters?
I would probably say no, they haven't. And I would think that one of the issues is I think the ANC in particular was not prepared to face the kind of wrath of the voting population that they have. I think they underestimated the frustration, the anger, the desperation that many South Africans feel as a result of precisely what you talked about. And this is in some ways, the sins of incumbency. You get into positions of power, you get very comfortable, and you think, well, we're just going to win all the elections. And I think the last government elections woke the ANC up. I'm not sure that they've done enough because they've been taken by internal battles in many cases in that energy. So I think the ANC is in a bit of a challenging situation. I think they would be very, very happy if they remained more or less where they were, if they didn't lose further ground. The DA has also, I think the story of these elections are for the 2 largest parties are their internal problems. I mean, the DA has gone through Musa Mamane is no longer there. The DA has gone through a whole range of different changes. And I think the DA is struggling to make itself a national party again, which it had begun to do. I think it's now seen again as predominantly a Western Cape party with possibly some presences in the larger metros. So its challenges, I think, are to convince the non-white population. I think many of its own sort of white voting base are convinced that they're going to vote for the DA. But beyond that, particularly the majority of the people in this country, the black population. And the DA has gone backwards on that front, I would argue, in the last while. And so I think that outside of the Western Cape, the DA is going to have a very difficult time convincing that electorate that they need to, what would take them over the top, should we say, to control the metros again, like Tshwane and Johannesburg. And for the EFF, I think they've got the easiest task. They're in opposition. They don't really have to answer for power. They can criticize both the DA and the ANC and say, here we are offering you all of these kinds of things if you put us in power. So I think the EFF is probably going to benefit quite somewhat from these elections. I'm not quite convinced that they're going to go, as many analysts have said, higher than 10% over the overall vote. But I think in certain metros, they certainly will play, as many people have said, this kingmaker role. They'll be the ones that determine the nature of the coalition, and they'll be able to call quite a lot of the shots.
I mean, I was going to ask you that, what are we to read about, political analysts saying that, the EFF is going to do tremendously well these local, government elections. But of course, you saying that you're not entirely convinced. Also, if you look at some of the political parties that they went into friendly coalitions with, as an example, some of those municipalities are not doing well.
No, I mean, the EFF hasn't done particularly well. It's where it has been in partial power, should we say, particularly even here in Tshwane, where we are right now. The service delivery issues are legion. But I also think that if you look at the EFF's constituency, it's predominantly, let's say, the under 30s, which would probably be pushing towards the EFF. That is the constituency that is the least registered, the least politically, electorally active, should we say. So if you look at the numbers of registered voters, and then you look at that section, 18 to 30-year-olds, it's not really increased a lot in the last 5 years. So the EFF's challenge is to appeal to this over 30, the middle age and the older folks, which is going to be a very difficult ask for most, I think, for the EFF. So its own constituency, it's saturated quite a bit, I think.
I mean, Dale, a lot of people don't know who to vote for. In fact, we've got this fantastic leaderboard that I'm going to go to and just show you what it can do in terms of just, providing some light in terms of the lay of the land in terms of these elections. But most people are going to go into that booth come the 1st of November, not knowing who to vote for. They're going to look at, those ballot papers and just make a cross wherever they want to. What are some of the things that, the dynamics that are coming into these elections that make it so difficult? So, for instance, we now have more than 1,500 independent candidates, vying for some of these seats.
Well, I think that's the story, is that with the opening up of the political space, with the lessening of the hegemony of the ANC, there's greater contestation. And in some ways that's good. That's democratically a good thing because people have more choice. If you look back at our elections, the first local government elections, it was just a few political parties. And so in some ways that's good. But as you say, it presents a bit of a conundrum for voters. I think if you look at from a local level, those independent candidates have a really good opportunities at the local level, because what democracy and accountability is all about, service delivery issues, is knowing the person who you're electing, holding them accountable so that they don't just vote and then leave. You vote for them and they leave, and I think that's been the problem. So in some ways I think it's a very beneficial thing. But if we're looking at this, the nature of the local government elections is necessarily messy, because these small-scale parties, they make a lot of noise, but actually at the end of the day in the electoral parties, if you look at them, they generally don't tend to get a larger share. They might get a few seats here and there, but I think if we're really paying attention, some of the independent candidates might do well in some sectors, yeah.
All right, so we've got this leaderboard. I'm going to go to it now. Exactly what you were saying now in terms of people who don't know who to vote for. Well, there's a plethora of people to consider. So let's take you now to this leaderboard that we have here. I found this fantastic site. Of course, we're using various sites, but let's talk about this site. It says find out who is contesting in your particular ward. And essentially what you do is you just click the name of your ward. Let's just say the IEC, because we are here at the IEC. I'm going to choose that address, but you can put in your address. So find my way, and it should then take you to the various candidates that are in your geographical area. So for instance, here we've got various candidates that are participating. We've got over 20 lists of various candidates and various political parties. So if I can do this and circle this, for instance, we've got Letabo Happy Masha in this area. She's 39 years old. I mean, this gives you a clear indication what you are likely to see. But then it also gives you an indication of the wards that this particular candidate is actually contesting for. And then, of course, after that, behind that, you've got Aaron Peary, 27 years old, African Christian Democracy Party, and he's only got a few candidates. But very, very interesting website. It will give you a list of names, a list of people that you can, choose. I really, really think that it is a fantastic a website. It's called mycandidate.opencitieslab.org. But I'm now going to bring in my colleague, Nina Ooshuizen, who is a digital guru. Nina, thank you so much for your time. I know that we here at the SABC have got various leaderboards that we are following and tracking, especially come 1st of November when we want to see those numbers trickling in. Talk to me firstly about which are the greatest sites that we can go to. Of course, SABC being the greatest site. But before we get there, Nina, I see you have voted. How was that experience?
It was amazing. They were so friendly. I had to apply for a special vote because I'm working. And I'm working outside of my ward. And they called me before the time. They gave me a time. I went in. It was quick. But one thing I want to implore your viewers is remember a pen.
Yes,
in these times, just remember a pen. Take it with you so that you can tick and be on your way.
And it just shows you that we are really voting in a different time. It is a pandemic. It is COVID-19. Well, Nina, I also dragged you here this afternoon so that we can talk about one or two of the sites that you find interesting that we will be using here come the 1st of November. Take us through some of them.
Okay, so first up, we have SABC News. And this is a dedicated election website where you'll find all the latest stories, all the latest results stories, as well as the videos from television news, but also the live streams. Anything big going on will be on this website. We also have different parts where you can go look at the parties, the candidates.
Service delivery gauge, very important,
opinion page, and some data from the previous local government election.
Absolutely.
But a page that I really want to implore people to go visit is from Senate.
Also.
And it's an election portal. Not only is it meant for aspiring and experienced journalists to give them a full view of how the local municipal elections work, it's for anyone who is interested and wants to know. Their whole method is to keep, by having more knowledge, we keep our democracy healthy.
And it also explains, I would imagine, the different ballot papers, what they mean, how many candidates are there, etc., etc.
So this tool that they've developed in collaboration with OpenUp is an election dashboard that literally breaks down from our census data your demographics, your living environments. It can even tell you in South Africa who has internet and who doesn't. It even breaks down where police stations are, where all our voting districts are.
Fantastic.
And protests from over the years. It's really powerful.
Can we click on one of them? Hopefully our internet service very, very fast.
Not right now.
Not right now, okay.
But I would implore people, go to your SANEF. You have your webinars here. We've had SABC experts on there, Ashra Bramdia, Isak Minnar, former editor of SABC Digital News, and
fantastic.
Regulatory modules and so much more.
Fantastic. Nina, thank you. I know you have a lot of work that you still need to do.
Yes.
So thank you for your time. We'll continue discussing everything with Dale. And, well, Dale, this is where we, that's the situation, that's the lay of the land, particularly that Open Cities website where people can actually go and see, who they can vote for if, for instance, they are confused. But it is a little bit worrying, though, to see that one person can actually be put out for several wards. I mean, doesn't that also create that question of, will this particular candidate be able, to provide us with the service delivery that we need? And also, will they be capacitated to do that?
Well, I think it's a very good question. And I think where you're going to see that happening is from those parties that don't have enough candidates to spread around to every single ward, not contesting every single ward. So they're essentially, it's like playing cards. They're spreading their bet and hoping that maybe if they don't do well in one ward, and you're right, that doesn't put a lot of degree of confidence in those candidates. It gets back to, you asked the initial question of whether parties have done enough. And we can have a lot of these tools which are very, very useful, but nothing can beat the door-to-door campaigning on the ground, talking to people, getting to know them, and that's what local government elections are all about. And I think that's what we are missing what people are missing. They feel like it's remote from them. And in that sense, those parties who've done the most, wherever they are, even if they're small in those areas, are going to do the best, I believe.
Let's get into this discussion now. We've looked at the top 3 political parties. Let's look at the other political parties, particularly Action SA. Are we likely to see this political party making any inroads, during this election?
I certainly think they've got a degree of support. I think it's overblown a little bit in terms of their media presence because Herman Mashaba was the former mayor and a DA politician, so he's getting quite a bit of play. He also has they have some very controversial policies which play to particular constituencies. And I think so what I see Action SA, they certainly will become a player. Whether they're the 4th or 5th largest or 6th, I'm not, that's difficult to say. But they might play also a sort of role in the larger metros like Johannesburg, where they're going to be asked to join coalitions, and we're going to talk about that. And I think that's where you're probably going to see Action SA have the most impact. I would doubt that they're going to have a great deal of influence in the smaller municipalities and others. But again, we've been surprised before, so it's hard to say.
Well, you went there, so let's talk about coalitions. I mean, a lot of people being very nervous because they want to vote for a particular party, but then they're hearing that the likelihood of that particular party, going into partnership with a party that they didn't particularly like, then that's going to be problematic. But I mean, the reality is, and we've seen it with the last local government elections, coalitions now seem to be a thing that we have to embrace. They look like they are going to be a reality for local governance in South Africa. Talk to me about what people should read into, coalition parties.
Well, I think if we look at international experience of coalition parties, it's quite varied. In some cases, they seem to work well because what it does is it takes the maximalist positions of a particular party and it makes them compromise. So you get a little bit of the best of everything. That's the best case scenario in a coalition. The worst case scenario, which we've also seen, is constant infighting. We saw it in the Nelson Mandela Bay. I mean, it's just been a disaster in that case, and obviously this in Tshwane as well. So I think where voters are going to look and to assess is whether or not they think the party they're going to vote for is serious about working with other parties. It's not that they have to be convinced about their party's positions. Those are fairly clear. But whether or not they're politically mature enough and have the capacity to actually say, we have to work with other parties. And I think this is where this maturity of South African democracy can come through in these local government elections. Coalitions are going to be there, and there's probably going to be several more than there were in the past. Are our political parties now, have they gone far enough to say, we can't just stand on the pulpit and speak what we want to say and criticize everybody else. We've got to back off sometimes. We've got to compromise in the interest of the people, not in the interest of our party. So it's the question that people are going to be asking themselves is, can the party put the people first as opposed to the party first? That's the fundamental question for coalitions.
And we know that that system didn't go so well. It hasn't worked so well. That's why we're probably sitting with so many municipalities that are currently under administration and so on and so on. But another pertinent question is to ask, yes, we are seeing a change. This democracy is growing. It's changing. People are now becoming more aware of what they need and what political parties need to do. What about active citizenry? South Africa, a lot of South Africans are, what can I do? They're now asking themselves that question. What is it that I can do to hold these officials responsible? Because we don't want to get into the mess that we have been, in the past.
Well, I think there's several ways that citizens can begin to do that. The one is to basically make sure that we pass legislation. I think we need to look at our electoral legislation. And one of the key aspects of the electoral legislation we need to look at is recall voting. So if there is, in many other countries, what you can have is you can have a local referendum, and you can say the politician that we've elected is doing precisely the opposite of what they said they were going to do, and we would like to recall them, or at least we'd like to have a referendum. Let's put that into our political recipe and see how that works. I think that's something that people can do. The other thing, of course, is to continue being active outside of the electoral process. So oftentimes people check and they say, we wait for delivery. That's not going to, clearly that hasn't worked. So whether it's out in the streets sometimes, whether it's constantly putting pressure on your representative, your party, whether it's it's talking to the media. All of these kinds of things that communities and people can do, I think, are very, very helpful. But the other problem is convincing that sizable section of the electorate that has not even registered and is not going to participate in elections, that they can also have an impact, that it's not just voting, which is political activity.
Dale, thank you so much. We can talk and talk and talk about these issues, pertinent issues, of course, and I mean, the people are speaking, they are concerned, they are worried. Dale McKinley there, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.